project we did in New York 10 years ago. Because New York is a good place to do shows. And we had this, a studio in the World Trade Center. We had this, a studio there for 3 months. And it's a very, looks like a wave. It's a very strange building, or it was a very strange building, because it's like to have a studio in there. It was on the 91st floor, and we shared with about 20 other artists. So you had a section of a floor there. We had 3 windows. So you had 3 windows and a strip. And then the next artist had 3 windows and a strip. And then, because it's basically impossible it's very difficult to bring material inside, because it's so high up. There's no telephones. Nobody can come and visit you. And it was very strange. And once you get inside, you walk inside and you take an elevator to floor 50, then you have to change to another elevator to get higher up, and things like this. And once you get up there, it took you 25 minutes from entering the building to your place. And then you think, the only thing you think is like you want to get out again, very fast. Because it's all this air conditioned and you're away from everybody. And then we decided we want to get out. And I have this book also. And we decided we will open a window and build a balcony. So it was 91st floor.
We were in occupancy, temporary occupancy, at the 88th floor of the North Tower, prior to moving permanently into the 91st floor of the North Tower.
I think it has 103 or so, somewhere here. We decided this is what we need. And then to stand on and like to be outside. So in the end it becomes what you start doing and thinking about is kind of the balcony is kind of let's say maybe it's a sculpture or a structure. And the form is the form of this sculptural structure is what you need. You need to get out. The windows are very narrow. Maybe this. So it's a very narrow construction. What we built. We built it of wood, which was complicated to get into the building. And what we did was to build it like a table. This is from the side. Yeah. Beams. You get this like normal wooden beams. In the back, we had a little platform where we put a box of sand on. And then it took us about 3 weeks to open the window. because it's a very complicated operation. It was, in the end, it turned out that it is like a car windshield, like the windshield of a car. It's a black rubber band. And what you do is you take a silicone spray and spray it in this black rubber. And then it makes the rubber smooth and go, and you can like grab in and pull this rubber out. And then we had bought this vacuum suction caps to hold the glass and lift it out of the frame. And in the end, which was also, we didn't tell anybody, not the other artists, because we thought they would not like the idea. So this is the building, maybe. Here's the top again. It goes down again. And to get there, I started in the middle. I should start in the beginning. That's it. To have a floor, this is the floor of the building. The elevators in the middle. And we were here. We had 3 windows here. And here was all artists. Painting, doing sculptures. Drawings, video artists, everybody. And then what we built, we went into a place where we got cardboard boxes for free. They were folded up. So we brought them up there with the freight elevators, and we built around our windows, we built walls of cardboard boxes, and then a double door and a room, and it looked like an Egyptian pyramid with a hidden door. So there was some system where you could take out some boxes and go into this room. And we told the other artists that we're meditating in there, that we're sitting in there and meditating, like looking out of the window meditating. And they thought this is so boring, they don't want to even know. They don't want to even go inside and see us meditating. But in the meanwhile, we were building this balcony inside. And then one day, it was a Sunday at 6 o'clock in the morning, because we figured out it's the time with almost no people in the building and nobody on the street. Then we opened the window and put the balcony outside, as you can see. And it was for 20 minutes or so. We had it out. And then we took it back in and closed the window. And we were so scared of everything that we dismantled the balcony immediately and made a little sitting bench out of it. But this is one thing, maybe to explain the aesthetics of a construction. And we did one mistake. We did one mistake because we painted the balcony. We painted this facade gray to make it very invisible, because we always looked at the gray structure. But once it was out, so you had the gray columns here of the building, and then the glass, the lines with the glass, which are black from the distance. And when we put it out, it was gray with this person standing on it. And it's a very good feeling to be out there. Feels extremely good. There's also in this book a page. Maybe I have to do it like this. Here is this little dot. Yeah, this is it. And here's, this was the structure. So you have these steel columns, and then there's always a glass frame. But it goes, it's high. It's 2 meters or more, like one glass panel. There is, yeah. So this was the wall with the boxes we built for the meditation. And the box of sand is basically the counterweight. Because the balcony would just push it out like a table. It's not fixed. When you stand in front, so it doesn't flip down. And yes. That was this one. And
did somebody figure it out that you were there?
We had.
Did somebody catch you? Or?
No.
No, nobody knew about it. Sure.
No, there were some people. Friends were in a building opposite, taking photographs.
Okay, yeah. But not security.
No,
like that.
No. It was a very low-key organized thing. It was not. We were working with people. They said like they could bring journalists and have it in the newspaper the next day and everything. But we reduced this all to we had basically 2 or 3 people taking photographs, and we had all the images. Like we had all the. It was before digital cameras, so it was more easy to control in a way.
Dan, are you coming close?
No, they don't.
Okay, they're coming. Okay, I just announced you that you're coming close, okay.
Okay, what's up? There's one point in, it's slower than you would think it would be. Yeah, it is slower than I thought. Okay. Perfect.
What you have to do is you have to line up once the helicopter's over here. Then the first step in this window, you get the picture taken, and you're gonna see, you're gonna hear if everything's okay. Then step away to the right side, leave it through this side over here, and the next one can enter. So that like as many as possible can get the picture taken.
Out in front of you. Coming back around. I see the light, I see the light.
Wait, you can see the light?
We're getting in position. Copy, copy. Okay, we're going to lower down a little bit. Front is in the front, she has the camera out. First person, let's get up there. He's over here, he's got it, he's got it. Next person. Look at your back. Next person.
He's so perfect.
Whoever's in the window right now, excellent position, if everyone can stand like her. Next person.
Okay?
Where's the one?
Next,
That's
okay.
the ring. Do it.
Okay.
Make it raise the flash.
Next, okay. That was for you then. Next. Okay, next.
Rosie, how we doing?
Good, good.
Good for you?
Yes, hey.
You guys have one? Next.
Okay,
Can I
next.
take the seatbelt off?
Next. Next. Okay.
I get down.
Get the helicopter. 6 miles. You said?
Can I take the seatbelt off? Yeah, the floats isn't the problem. It's just it's really hard to keep it still. But I mean, you can tell there are people standing in the window. It's lit.
Okay. What? Okay, next. Okay, next. Yeah.
I gotta move, guys. I'll come right back.
Kyle, we'll be coming right back. We have to move. We have to move.
Because the heat's on too, we're fogging up all the windows.
Okay, okay. Now they're coming back. They just have to move. I don't know why they have to move. They just have to move. They're coming back. Yeah, I just don't know why.
Your window isn't fogging up, is it?
No, it's pretty clear.
Okay, because I don't want it to fog up. I put the air conditioning on, so it might be a little... You locked and loaded?
You ready? You ready? Yeah. Okay, yep, she's ready. Yeah. Can you take pictures? Yeah. Well, wait. This is fine. We can get pictures.
Next, please.
Wow. Franzi's focusing. Next.
Next.
Sorry.
Okay, next, please. Oh, we only have 2 more minutes. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Next person.
Hey, go closer, go closer. We want to see you.
1 second, she's focusing. Can I get closer?
Next person. Okay. Long line.
minute.
Okay, next.
We got 1 minute left. Next. Okay, this is it. This is it. See you. He's clutch. I have no copy. See you. Make way from everybody. We got it.
Hey guys, John Friend here. My website's john-friend.net, and I also host a radio program called The Realist Report on TalkShoe. If you go over to my website, you can see the TalkShoe icon for The Realist Report right there on the upper right-hand side of the page, and I'd encourage you to visit it and download and check out some of my radio programs. Now, those of you who are watching this who are familiar with my website and The Realist Report, you'll know that I've talked quite a bit about 9/11, and especially the Israeli and Jewish connections to 9/11. And what you're looking at right now is a book produced by an art group called Gelatin, and the book is called The Bee Thing. And these individuals, this art group, was actually living in World Trade Center Tower 1 shortly before 9/11, in the months leading up to 9/11, in the year prior to 9/11. And there's been speculation that this art group was actually connected to all of the other Israeli art groups who were they were essentially Israeli military and intelligence operatives posing as art students, and they were connected to illegal drug operations. They were also engaging in espionage and essentially casing federal buildings and trying to infiltrate federal buildings. And they were even surveilling federal officials. And the DEA, customs officials, the FBI, and other agencies investigated these guys and sort of figured out this art student spy ring. And they arrested numerous of these individuals. Over 140 were arrested prior to 9/11, and many more were arrested after 9/11. And it's important to point out that on the day of 9/11 in New York City, the only people who were arrested in connection with what was taking place were themselves Israeli military and intelligence operatives. And all of these individuals who were arrested by our own federal government were sent back to Israel on minor visa violations, and they essentially weren't even investigated when it was very clear that they were tied in to what took place that day. And it shouldn't surprise us, considering that the man who was in charge of investigating 9/11, or one of the main guys, his name was Michael Chertoff, and he's a dual American-Israeli citizen, so he let his buddies go back to Israel without being investigated. Now, again, what you're looking at is a book produced by an art group called Gelatin, and I believe they're actually based in Austria, in Vienna, Austria. And I just opened up the first page here, and at the very top, it's written in German. There's sort of an explanation, and it's kind of like an introduction. This book is very, very bizarre, and it's very interesting, and I think it definitely is connected to what happened on 9/11. And essentially what this guy does, his name is Tex Rabinowitz, and this was produced February 2001, and he kind of explains what this Gelatin group is all about. They're 4 guys, and he talks about how their art project, their little art stunt that they pulled off in the World Trade Center Tower 1 was very illegal, and they had to keep all of their activities concealed. And it's a really, really weird read. I don't want to sit here and read it all to you, but he's basically describing this art group and how their activities were illegal. So I'm going to continue here. I'm going to turn the page. This is the sort of the credits. It was courtesy of, essentially these guys were sponsored by Leo Koenig Inc. in New York and Gallery Mayer Kainer in Vienna. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So these were the 2 art galleries that sponsored these guys, sponsored the Gelatin art group. And if you look right here, it says Gelatin, the Bee Thing. And I'd just like to go through here and show you all what's in this book. It's very interesting. It's very bizarre. But again, I think it definitely is connected to what happened on 9/11. There's a lot of just really weird sketches, like this one. And I'll turn the page, and here's another really weird sketch. Here's what looks like the World Trade Center towers. It's got the big antenna here on the top. And here's where they were. They were on the 91st floor. And what they were doing, they basically popped out a window and built a balcony. And they were going to do a little art stunt on this balcony. They were going to photograph themselves. And it explains it in this book. But it looks like there's a sketch of a pig, which is really weird. And then there's like a man's head on like a cockroach's body. So some of this stuff is very bizarre. Here's more bizarre sketches on the next page. And what looks like a little bug right there. And then they also have some dimensions drawn out here. I believe this is kind of to prepare for their balcony. At least that's what I'm assuming. Some of this stuff I really don't know what to make of it. Some of it's written in German, because again, this Gelatin group was actually based in Austria, in Vienna, Austria. Here's another sketch. Very, very weird. Down here it looks like it says fields, flowers, flunder, ficken, I believe is what it says. And those last two words may be in German, I'm not sure. Again, more diagrams here. Looks like they're sort of preparing their balcony that they were going to build to perform this art stunt. More dimensions, more numbers and whatnot. Another sketch up here. And apparently this book is very expensive. I want to thank, I had a listener of the Realist Report actually send me this book, loan me this book so I could do this, because he knows I'm very interested in 9/11. And again, I think what these guys were up to, they may have been a front for the Israeli military and intelligence operatives who were perhaps preparing the buildings for demolition, or I'm not really sure. That's kind of speculation on my part, but I definitely think, again, that they had something to do with what took place on 9/11. Here's another sketch. And again, some of this is written in German, so I'm not sure exactly what it says. More figures right here. And then here we come to the first picture. And I'm assuming these two guys are with the Gelatin art group. And in all of these photos, you never see their faces. And it describes how they basically built an enclosure around the building the window that they were going to be using to build this balcony. And they used cardboard boxes. And it talks about that later on. Here's a really kind of interesting and bizarre picture that they put in here. It kind of folds out like this. So here it looks like the World Trade Center tower. Go to the very top and there's the antenna. And then look right here, there's an airplane. Does that remind you about what took place in New York on 9/11? Or what allegedly took place in New York on 9/11? Very, very weird stuff. Here's another photo. The two gentlemen, again with their backs to us, looking out the window. You can see the cardboard here. Turn the page. Now this actually describes what they did, and this is written on March 6th, 2000, so it started back in 2000. And it says here in the preface, the work of Gelatin evolves from desires about situations we miss and we want to be in. The project balcony has been developed from a very strong desire to step outside a window on the 91st floor. The balcony is about the feeling you have when you stand on it and about the pleasure you absorb when being totally dependent on a structure and atmosphere you have created yourself. And then number 1 here, it says the project. Number 1.1 address says the project balcony will take place on the 91st floor of World Trade Center 1. Gelatin has a studio space there. The studio space is provided by the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and it's important to point that out. The Lower Manhattan Cultural Program allegedly had individuals who were connected to these other art student spy rings and connected to the State of Israel. So again, that's important to point out. Jonathan Elenov, an investigative journalist, has written about this, and I'm going to have a link to an article in the description of this video that you can check out. It goes on to say, Gelatin is on a floor with other artists who are part of this studio program. Gelatin's space, the window where action will happen, is walled in with a system of cardboard boxes, and you saw that in some of the photos. And then it says, other artists sharing floor 91 do not know what we are planning and doing. The construction of the balcony and all other preparations are not visible for them. And then it says 1.2, the balcony. The balcony is a prefabricated construction made by Gelatin. One person at a time will be able to stand on it. The balcony will be camouflaged. It will be built to be as less visible as possible for any passerby on the street. It will be taken apart the moment after being pulled back in. 3.1, the window One window will be taken out. The removing of the window is done in a professional and secured action. No constructive parts of the building will be removed or damaged. There will not be any visible traces after the window will have been put back in. And then it talks about here up on the next page, 1.4 documentation. Photographs and video coverage will only be taken by contracted professionals. Photographs will be taken from a room at the Millennial Hilton, and that was a hotel right near the World Trade Center towers. And then it says, the film rolls and videotapes will be handed to Gelatin. There will be no journalists nor press photographers. There is no intention to get the story in the media. There will be no pictures being published but by Gelatin. And then 2 is the day. 2.1 date. The project will take place next Sunday at sunrise. So apparently this was taking place in March 2000. And they were going to do it right at sunrise at 6:15 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. And then it talks about if the weather doesn't work out, they do it the following Sunday morning, I believe. So that's pretty much what it says here. Down at the bottom is very interesting. It talks about the publication of the book, which you're looking at. The publication of the project balcony will be handled carefully. There will be a printed booklet. The booklet will be released a couple of weeks, months after the event. Until this day of release, there will not appear any images about the project. And then it says, getting caught, number 4. This is interesting. Nobody but Gelatin is officially involved in the project. There will be an attorney telling Gelatin how to behave. There will be an attorney responsible to handle the case for Gelatin. And then it's got a number right here for Gelatin. I think 917 is a New York area code. So here's another photo of what they were up to. Again, you can't see their faces. You can see the cardboard here. Another photo. Looks like the guy sitting out there right at sunrise. You can kind of see. Try to zoom in here a little bit. Looks like what looks like a little like the tail of a helicopter right there. Here's another photo. Looks like here's the balcony right here. And then I'm assuming that's the Hudson River. And then here's sort of a cityscape of New York City. I'm assuming this is taken from the 91st floor. And it's interesting to note that World Trade Center 1 was allegedly hit by Flight 11, which we know is not the case, but it was allegedly hit on the 92nd floor, from the 92nd floor to the 98th floor. So just above where Gelatin was. And once again, Gelatin was granted permission to do this, and sort of, I'm not sure if they were funded by them, but they're, sort of working with the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And again, agents of this Israeli art student spy ring have been alleged to be connected to the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. So was Gelatin maybe a front for what Israel was up to? Maybe preparing the buildings for demolition, or somehow being involved with what took place on 9/11? Here's another photo. Here's the balcony, it looks like. A guy standing out there. Here's some smaller photos. We're almost to the end here. This is, sort of giving their love to individuals who are involved with it. More about the bee thing. wtc.window.to. And then here's another photo, which is, I have no idea what this is. I don't know, they might be Japanese ladies, I'm not sure. I don't know if they were involved in this. It doesn't really say. It's really bizarre. And then the last photo is sort of a diagram of what they were doing. Again, World Trade Center Tower 1, 91st floor. Here's the helicopter that was going to actually take the photographs of these guys when they were posing or doing whatever they were doing on this balcony that they built. So it's very bizarre. There's been speculation that the World Trade Center towers themselves were never actually totally built, and that many of the middle floors were actually hollow. And you can see a photo. There's an interesting photo that you can see of the Twin Towers. I believe it was taken right in the morning, and you can see through them. You can see through the World Trade Center towers like there's no floors in the middle parts of the buildings. So it's very interesting. 9/11 is still a mystery to me. It's very clear, though, that the State of Israel and an international Jewish network of criminals were behind it, and they've benefited from it ever since. They've used it to justify the global war on terror, which is essentially the United States and NATO destroying and defeating all of Israel's adversaries in the Middle East. And they've also used 9/11 to justify the total destruction of our Constitution. So again, this is Gelatin, the Bee Thing. Very interesting book. You hear rumors about it on the internet, and I actually have a copy here. I want to thank my friend Matthew for sending this to me. And I just wanted to show everybody that this book was real, and it's very interesting and very bizarre. And again, I think this may have something to do with what happened on 9/11. So just wanted to show everybody. Thanks for watching.
Fill us in on the details and the reaction that you've gotten to this story.
Basically, there was a group of art students that I came across. Somebody had sent me a lead on a story, and I wasn't quite sure about it. I got the New York Times article and looked into it, and apparently these art students were a part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program. Now, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program was on floors 90 and 91 in World Trade Center Tower 1. But this Israeli art student, I think some people got a little misconception about what I was reporting. It was an innocent art stunt, yada, yada, yada. But as I dug a little bit deeper, one of the art students who was a part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program, there was 15 involved in the Bee Thing stunt for Gelatin, which is the name of that prank that I showed the photos of, the art prank that they removed a window and wheeled a deck out. One of those art students, his name is Hanan Surfati. Now, that gentleman was in the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program. I don't know if he was there that day, but he did. He was a part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program. If you go back to Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program, the list of a lot of those guys is not there anymore. The DEA original arresting report shows this information. Why the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program doesn't show this anymore is a mystery to me, but the DEA report shows it, that he was a member of that program. Well, that's interesting because he's an Israeli military intelligence officer who rented 2 Hollywood apartments close to the mail drop and apartment of Muhammad Atta while he was in Los Angeles at the very same time.
Now, wait a minute. This is the guy Hanan Surfati, who's part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program that allowed these guys to set up and do their stunt in the tower.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
And this man, Hanan Surfati, was carrying bank slips showing more than $100,000 deposited from December 2000 through the first quarter of 2001. Other bank slips showed withdrawals for about $80,000 during the same period. Surfati's apartment, serving as cash pad, was also for at least 2 other art students who were located, I'm not going to give out the addresses, but I have those addresses, where allegedly lead hijacker Muhammad Atta's mail drop was. And they were also, both Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, were renting an apartment 2 blocks away from Hanan Surfati when he was in Florida at the very same time.
What a coincidence. They just keep bumping into each other.
Right, and so DEA agents, and the reason why they found all this out, by the way, was because they were tracing these guys a part of an Israeli art student spy program. There was about 140 to 200 Israeli art students that were penetrating military bases. If you watch my film Core Corruption, I show the report. These guys penetrated DEA, IRS, Pentagon, military bases, you name it, and the ATF. And they did it because they claimed to be art brokers and art students. They would walk around with art portfolios and say, hey, I've got to deliver this. It's a very expensive art. Yeah. Somehow they made it past security, and they were walking around the halls of the Pentagon. And they ended up penetrating the entire United States security. And the DEA report found all this out because they were tracking an ecstasy trafficking ring. They were tracking drug runners. And drug runners were staying ahead of them by their phone calls, switching, and their stuff like that. And when they came across the fact that these guys were ex-Israeli military and they were spying, and they were certain of this, The investigation was put into a top-secret compartmentalized report, and the DEA raided an Irvington apartment in Texas, and Hanan Sarfati was down there in Texas as a part of this Israeli spy ring. Is a huge connection, because this specific spy ring was following the cells in 9/11. This specific spy ring was on 9/11 with vans packed with explosives. This specific spy ring was caught trying to blow up a nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania. They were caught surveying the Sears Tower. And there was speculation by Chicago PD they were trying to blow up the Sears Tower. That report got buried. If people search hard enough, they'll find these reports. This is a very weird connection to have.
It certainly is. And this was one of the first 9/11 truth kinds of stories to develop back in 2001. Justin Raimondo of antiwar.com was all over the Israeli art student story. And then suddenly he, a young, healthy guy, he had a mysterious heart attack, and he hasn't talked much about it ever since. We also had Carl Cameron of Fox News, and of course you have his clips in Core of Corruption. And there's a really interesting story by Christopher Ketchum, who's he's pretty much a mainstream journalist, who wrote a piece for Salon.com about this Israeli spy ring of pseudo-art students connected to the 9/11 hijackers. And he quoted a high-level intelligence source as saying that there are people in the FBI and the U.S. intelligence services who are really trying to get this information out. They're going to great lengths to try to get it out, but they're patriots. But the problem, he says, is that patriots are dead. And that's a direct quote from this Christopher Ketchum article. So this information was out there in 2001, 2002, but it wasn't being noticed very much by the mainstream.
Right, and there's something I want to mention here. Hanan Sarfati living blocks away from suspected hijackers on 9/11, according to the official story. The reason why that's interesting is because, remember, September 21st, 2001, CNN reported that FBI Director Robert Mueller acknowledged that some of those behind the attack may have stolen the identification of the people they believed to be the hijackers. Now, the reason why that's interesting is because what if Hanan Sarfati, living blocks away from where allegedly Otto was in Florida and where he allegedly was in L.A., now it looks a little interesting. Because remember, none of these guys' names show up on flight manifest. A lot of people talk about stolen identification and leaving intentional paper trails, like that passport that was suddenly found, that supposedly was found on the streets of New York. The bags that were allegedly left that forgot to make the flight. A paper trail. They're leaving a trail of evidence, right? I think that there's CIA involvement. And when you go to McDonald's in Canada or if you go to McDonald's in the U.S., are you going to two different McDonald's? No, because it's an international corporation. This is how the intelligence apparatus works for the Western establishment. If you go to Britain, their front offices are called MI5. You go to U.S., their front offices are called CIA. You go to Israel, their front offices are called the Mossad. Does that mean that they're different agencies? Yes, they can be compartmentalized and operate differently, but the controllers of that agency are international. The behavior is international because if you look at 60-year period of Cold War, who supplied the arms in Iran-Contra? Well, the Israelis. But who trained the Contras? Well, a bunch of CIA operatives in the Southern Crescent from Texas to Florida. But that's my point, is that there's joint operations because it's all a part of the same apparatus. The entire
let me stop you here, though. Webster Tarpley in the first hour was pointing out that right now the British financiers and the intelligence apparatus that they're involved with is attacking the U.S. dollar as well as other currencies with the rather crazy hope that the pound will be the last currency standing. That would just be one example, if it's true, of the way that these intelligence agencies can, at times, work against each other on behalf of their national interests. So just like other mafias, mafias sometimes work together and sometimes they get into a gang war, right?
Compartmentalized, yeah. If I was the CEO of a big company and I had 100 departments underneath me, those departments are going to be working separately from each other. But as the CEO, I have the ability to pull one department and another department and another department and start an operation with these three departments. And all the other departments still working separately don't know. And that's how an intelligence operation is done. And when you're high enough up in the system, you can actually pull somebody from MI5, somebody from Mossad, and somebody from the CIA at your own leisure and use them in a separate operation in a black operation. Does that mean that those agencies are all working together? No, they're still separately. But the controllers have the ability to utilize anything at their dispense. And remember, ISI and GID was set up by the CIA and MI5. So seeing their involvement in 9/11 actually really points still to the same Zionist empire. And that's a more accurate term, because if you look at the Western establishment, you have Christians, Protestants, and Jews, and Satanists and other people that actually make up primarily the Western establishment. That empire has one intelligence apparatus. Yes, it's departmentalized and it has separate entities in each nation, and it operates that way, but the controllers at the top have the ability to pull people from anyone in any nation that they control into a separate operation. And 9/11 has every single sign pointing to that establishment, that Western establishment, which would suggest that the people behind 9/11 are from that establishment and nowhere else, which means we should stop looking in the Middle East and start looking upwards and, upstream into our own establishment in the private sector and in government sector, maybe big defense contractors, maybe black operations, maybe military, maybe, banking families. We don't know, but up at the top there, they have the ability.
Indeed. Look up, not out. And maybe if we look up at who's really ruling us, we will be motivated to make some changes, because those folks ruling us are not good people, and they don't have our interests at heart. I'm Kevin Barrett, talking right now with Jonathan Elenoff of coreofcorruption.com, and we'll be back for one more.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a four-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Another part of the investigation has resulted in the detention and arrests of dozens of Israelis at American Mall kiosks, where they've been selling toys called Puzzle Car and Zoomcopter. Investigators suspect a front. Shortly after the New York Times and Washington Post reported the Israeli detentions last month, the carts began vanishing. Zoomcopter's webpage says, "We are aware of the situation caused by thousands of mall carts being closed at the last minute. This in no way reflects the quality of the toy or its saleability. The problem lies in the operator's business policies." Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, "According to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally." A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, "The Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target." The document concludes, quote, "Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives."
A spokesman for the Israeli embassy here in Washington issued a categorical denial, saying any suggestion that Israelis are spying in or on the U.S. is, quote, "simply not true." There are other things to consider, and in the days ahead, we will take a look at the U.S. phone system and law enforcement's methods for wiretaps, and an investigation into the possibility that both have been compromised by our friends and allies overseas. Brett?
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
Yeah, this going to the fact that they were spying on some Arabs, right?
Correct.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We reported on the approximately 60 Israelis who had been detained in connection with the September 11th terrorism investigation. Carl Cameron reported that U.S. investigators suspect that some of these Israelis were spying on Arabs in this country and may have turned up information on the planned terrorist attacks back in September that was not passed on. Tonight, in the second of 4 reports on spying by Israelis in the U.S., we learn about an Israeli-based private communications company for whom a half-dozen of those 60 detained suspects worked. American investigators fear information generated by this firm may have fallen into the wrong hands and had the effect of impeding the September 11th terror inquiry. Here's Carl Cameron's second report.
Fox News has learned that some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. How? By obtaining and analyzing data that's generated every time someone in the U.S. makes a phone call.
One sitting in city, please.
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Amdocs has contracts with the 25 biggest phone companies in America and more worldwide. The White House and other secure government phone lines are protected, but it is virtually impossible to make a call on normal phones without generating an Amdocs record of it. In recent years, the FBI and other government agencies have investigated Amdocs more than once. The firm has repeatedly and adamantly denied any security breaches or wrongdoing. But sources tell Fox News that in 1999, the super-secret National Security Agency, headquartered in northern Maryland, issued what's called a top-secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information report, TSSCI, warning that records of calls in the United States were getting into foreign hands, in Israel in particular. Investigators do not believe calls are being listened to, but the data about who's calling whom and when is plenty valuable in itself. An internal Amdocs memo to senior company executives suggests just how Amdocs generated call records could be used. Quote, widespread data mining techniques and algorithms, combining both the properties of the customer, like credit rating, and properties of the specific behavior such as whom the customers are calling. The Amdocs memo says the system should be used to prevent phone fraud, but U.S. counterintelligence analysts say it could also be used to spy through the phone system. Fox News has learned that the NSA has held numerous classified conferences to warn the FBI and CIA how Amdocs records could be used. At one NSA briefing, a diagram by the Argonne National Lab was used to show that if the phone records are not secure, major security breaches are possible. Another briefing document said, quote, it has become increasingly apparent that systems and networks are vulnerable. Such crimes always involve unauthorized persons or persons who exceed their authorization, acting on exploitable vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities are growing because, according to another briefing, the U.S. relies too much on foreign companies like Amdocs for high-tech equipment and software. Quote, many factors have led to increased dependence on code developed overseas. We buy rather than train or develop solutions.
U.S. intelligence does not believe the Israeli government is involved in a misuse of Amdocs information, and Amdocs insists that its data is secure. What U.S. government officials are worried about, however, is the possibility that Amdocs data could get into the wrong hands, particularly organized crime, and that would not be the first time that such a thing has happened. Fox News has documents of a 1997 drug trafficking case in Los Angeles in which telephone information, the types that Amdocs collects, was used to, quote, completely compromise the communications of the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA, and the LAPD. And we'll have that and a lot more in the days ahead, Brett.
Carl, I want to take you back to your report last night on those 60 people who were Israelis who were detained in the anti-terror investigation, and the suspicion that some investigators have that they may have picked up information on the 9/11 attacks ahead of time, not passed it on. There was a report, you'll recall, that the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, did indeed send representatives to the U.S. to warn just before 9/11 that a major terrorist attack was imminent. Why does that not? How does that leave room for the lack of a warning?
Well, I remember the report, Brett. We did it first internationally right here on your show on the 14th. What investigators are saying is that that warning from the Mossad was nonspecific and general, and they believe that it may have had something to do with the desire to protect what are called sources and methods in the intelligence community. The suspicion being perhaps those sources and methods were taking place right here in the United States. The question came up in the Select Intelligence Committee on Capitol Hill today. They intend to look into what we reported last night, and specifically that possibility. Brett?
So, in other words, the problem wasn't the lack of a warning. The problem was lack of useful details.
Quantity of information.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. Coming up next, Israeli-based company called Amdocs that generates the computerized records and billing data for nearly every phone call made in America. As Carl Cameron reported, U.S. investigators digging into the 9/11 terrorist attacks fear that suspects may have been tipped off to what they were doing by information leaking out of Amdocs. In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping. Here is Carl Cameron's third report.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comverse are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators. The manufacturers have continuing access to the computers so they can service them and keep them free of glitches. This process was authorized by the 1994 Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, or CALEA. Senior government officials have now told Fox News that while CALEA made wiretapping easier, it has led to a system that is seriously vulnerable to compromise and may have undermined the whole wiretapping system. Indeed, Fox News has learned that Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller were both warned October 18th in a hand-delivered letter from 15 local, state, and federal law enforcement officials who complained that, quote, law enforcement's current electronic surveillance capabilities are less effective today than they were at the time CALEA was enacted. Comverse insists the equipment it installs is secure, but the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Comverse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Comverse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Comverse is considered career suicide. And sources say that while various FBI inquiries into Converse have been conducted over the years, they've been halted before the actual equipment has ever been thoroughly tested for leaks. A 1999 FCC document indicates several government agencies expressed deep concerns that too many unauthorized, non-law enforcement personnel can access the wiretap system. And the FBI's own nondescript office in Chantilly, Virginia, that actually oversees the CALEA wiretapping program, is among the most agitated about the threat. But there is a bitter turf war internally at FBI. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia, that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years, they've thrown much of the business to Converse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Converse government contracts over the years now work for the company. Numerous sources say some of those individuals were asked to leave government service under what knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department.
And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
Carl, is there any reason to suspect in this instance that the Israeli government is involved?
No, there's not, but there are growing instincts and an awful lot of law enforcement officials in a variety of agencies who suspect that and have begun compiling evidence and a highly classified investigation into precisely that possibility. Brett?
All right, Carl, thanks very much.
On a long-standing government espionage investigation, federal officials this year have arrested or detained nearly 200 Israeli citizens suspected of belonging to a, quote, organized intelligence gathering operation. The Bush administration has deported most of those arrested after September 11th, although some are in custody under the new anti-terrorism law. Cameron also described an investigation into the possibility that an Israeli firm generated billing data that could be used for intelligence purposes, and described concerns that the federal government's own wiretapping system may be vulnerable. Tonight, in part 4 of the series, we'll learn about the improbable roots of the probe, a drug case that went bad 4 years ago in L.A.
Los Angeles, 1997. A major local, state, and federal drug investigation sours. The suspects? Israeli organized crime, with operations in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, Canada, Israel, and Egypt. The allegations? Cocaine and ecstasy trafficking and sophisticated white-collar credit card and computer fraud. The problem? According to classified law enforcement documents obtained by Fox News, the bad guys had the cops' beepers, cell phones, even home phones under surveillance. Some who did get caught admitted to having hundreds of numbers and using them to avoid arrest. Quote, this compromised law enforcement communications between LAPD detectives and other assigned law enforcement officers working various aspects of the case. The organization discovered communications between Organized Crime Intelligence Division detectives, the FBI, and the Secret Service. Shock spread from the DEA to the FBI in Washington and then the CIA. An investigation of the problem, according to law enforcement documents, concluded, quote, the organization has apparent extensive access to database systems to identify pertinent personal and biographical information. When investigators tried to find out where the information might have come from, they looked at Amdocs, a publicly traded firm based in Israel. Amdocs generates billing data for virtually every call in America, and they do credit checks. The company denies any leaks, but investigators still fear that the firm's data is getting into the wrong hands. When investigators checked their own wiretapping system for leaks, they grew concerned about potential vulnerabilities in the computers that intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls. A main contractor is Converse Infosys, which works closely with the Israeli government and under a special grant program is reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by Israel's Ministry of Industry and Trade. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those individuals said they had served in the Israeli military, which is compulsory there, but they also had, most of them, intelligence expertise and either worked for Amdocs or other companies in Israel that specialize in wiretapping. Earlier this week, the Israeli embassy here in Washington denied any spying against or in the United States. Tony?
Carl, we've heard the comments from Ari Fleischer and Colin Powell. What are officials saying behind the scenes?
Well, there's real pandemonium described at both the FBI, the DEA, and the INS. A lot of these problems have been well known to some investigators, many of whom have contributed to the reporting on this story. And what they say is happening is supervisors and management are now going back and collecting much of the information because there's tremendous pressure from top levels of all of those agencies to find out exactly what's going on. At the DEA and the FBI already, a variety of administrative reviews are underway, in addition to the investigation of the phenomenon. They want to find out how it is that all this has come out, as well as be very careful because of the explosive nature and very political ramifications of the story itself. Tony?
All right.
Amdocs memo to senior company executives suggests just how Amdocs generated call records could be used. Quote, widespread data mining techniques and algorithms, combining both the properties of the customer, like credit rating, and properties of the specific behavior such as whom the customers are calling. The Amdocs memo says the system should be used to prevent phone fraud, but U.S. counterintelligence analysts say it could also be used to spy through the phone system. Fox News has learned that the NSA has held numerous classified conferences to warn the FBI and CIA how Amdocs records could be used. At one NSA briefing, a diagram by the Argonne National Lab was used to show that if the phone records are not secure, major security breaches are possible. Another briefing document said, quote, it has become increasingly apparent that systems and networks are vulnerable. Such crimes always involve unauthorized persons or persons who exceed their authorization, acting on exploitable vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities are growing because, according to another briefing, the U.S. relies too much on foreign companies like Amdocs for high-tech equipment and software. Quote, many factors have led to increased dependence on code developed overseas. We buy rather than train or develop solutions.
U.S. intelligence does not believe the Israeli government is involved in a misuse of Amdocs information, and Amdocs come from, they looked at Amdocs, a publicly traded firm based in Israel. Amdocs generates billing data for virtually every call in America, and they do credit checks. The company denies any leaks, but investigators still fear that the firm's data is getting into the wrong hands. When investigators checked their own wiretapping system for leaks, they grew concerned about potential vulnerabilities in the computers that intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls. A main contractor is Comverse Infosys, which works closely with the Israeli government and under a special grant program is reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by Israel's Ministry of Industry and Trade. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those intelligence committee on Capitol Hill today, they intend to look into what we reported last night, and specifically that possibility. Brett?
So, in other words, the problem wasn't the lack of a warning, the problem was lack of useful details.
Quantity of information.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. Coming up next, Israeli-based company called Amdocs that generates the computerized records and billing data for nearly every phone call made in America. As Carl Cameron reported, U.S. investigators digging into the 9/11 terrorist attacks fear that suspects may have been tipped off to what they were doing by information leaking out of Amdocs. In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping. Here is Carl Cameron's third report.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comverse are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators. The manufacturers have continuing access to the computers so they can service them and keep them free of glitches. This process was authorized by the 1994 Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, or CALEA. Senior government officials have now told Fox News that while CALEA made wiretapping easier, it has led to a system that is seriously vulnerable to compromise and may have undermined the whole wiretapping system. Indeed, Fox News has learned that Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller were both warned October 18th in a hand-delivered letter from 15 local, state, and federal law enforcement officials who complained that, quote, law enforcement's current electronic surveillance capabilities are less effective today than they were at the time CALEA was enacted. Comverse insists the equipment it installs is secure, but the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Comverse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Comverse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Comverse is considered career suicide. And sources say that while various FBI inquiries into Comverse have been conducted over the years, they've been halted before the actual equipment has ever been thoroughly tested for leaks. A 1999 FCC document indicates several government agencies expressed deep concerns that too many...
None of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
Yeah, this going to the fact that they were spying on some Arabs, right?
Correct.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We reported on the approximately 60 Israelis who had been detained in connection with the September 11th terrorism investigation. Carl Cameron reported that U.S. investigators suspect that some of these Israelis were spying on Arabs in this country and may have turned up information on the planned terrorist attacks back in September that was not passed on. Tonight, in the second of 4 reports on spying by Israelis in the U.S., we learn about an Israeli-based private communications company for whom a half-dozen of those 60 detained suspects worked. American investigators fear information generated by this firm may have fallen into the wrong hands and had the effect of impeding the September 11th terror inquiry. Here's Carl Cameron's second report.
Fox News has learned that some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. How? By obtaining and analyzing data that's generated every time someone in the U.S. makes a phone call.
What city and state, please?
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company.
Intelligence community, the suspicion being perhaps those sources and methods were taking place right here in the United States. The question came up in the Select Intelligence Committee on Capitol Hill today. They intend to look into what we reported last night, and specifically that possibility. Brett?
So, in other words, the problem wasn't the lack of a warning, the problem was lack of useful details.
Quantity of information.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. Coming up next, Israeli-based company called Amdocs that generates the computerized records and billing data for nearly every phone call made in America. As Carl Cameron reported, U.S. investigators digging into the 9/11 terrorist attacks fear that suspects may have been tipped off to what they were doing by information leaking out of Amdocs. In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping. Here is Carl Cameron's third report.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comverse are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators.
Los Angeles, good morning.
Good morning. Brian, thank you for your network, actually. Mr. Wolf, back in December, Carl Cameron from Fox News ran a 4-part series that detailed like a really massive spying operation by Israel that was tapping all the phones in the United States and tapping all the secure lines of the FBI, the CIA, and the White House.
All the phones in the United States?
Yeah, through companies that
imagine that transcription effort.
Yeah, well, of course it's done with keywords and all that in software, but the other thing was that all the secure lines to the White House and basically the entire federal government. They also said, and this was corroborated in a report released by the DEA, that there was a team of art students that were expelled. Actually, it was the largest spy-related expulsion in American history, that had teams of intelligence guys, Israeli intelligence guys, on the same block.
And this was a Fox report?
A Fox report by Carl Cameron. It was then, and they were the only ones that picked it up, although...
Is that good or bad? Did you believe the report?
Yeah, yeah, there definitely was a true report. The local newspaper reports had it and others, but no one on the air carried it, except Fox News. And then, to make matters worse, Fox News, even on their web, you can go into the December archives and look at the report. Actually, you can look at where the report was, Israeli spying or whatever, and they actually pulled it from the archives and nobody followed up. Even though,
this is a conspiracy of silence, are you saying?
Well, if you go back through the archives, Mr. Wolf, you'll see that it's the only report pulled. The archives go back through, like last year.
Okay, thanks for the call.
Next call for Bill Gertz comes from Newark, Delaware, on our independent line. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's see, I was interested in the story that Carl Cameron broke, 120 Israeli spies that were arrested in the United States shortly after the September incident, and some of these people had been shadowing the terrorists that blew up the buildings, living in the vicinity and keeping up with them. On May 17th, 2 Israelis were arrested in Washington State in a van that had traces of high explosives. I think it was 5 Israeli military spies, as they, the way they described, were in a building in Brooklyn watching the September bombing, and all of this has been kept out of the press. And I just wonder. I mean, this is good reading. This is what we want to know about. If Israel supposedly knew, and there's stories that their intelligence agency told our government, why isn't that the story? When did we know? What did they know? When did they let us know?
Are you familiar with this story?
Yes, good questions. As for the 120 Israeli spies, that's a story that's out there. I've looked at that a little bit. I really haven't found really what's behind that story. What is going on there is that there have been a number of Israelis, and I've actually seen some people come to my house in Maryland who are selling art, and they identify themselves as students, and there's something unusual about it. I have a feeling that this may be some collection aspect to it, but I don't see any kind of major effort to figure out. I know that the U.S. government has expelled some of these people. You mentioned the May 17th incident on the West Coast. I looked into this very carefully, and this was a story that 2 Israeli nationals were stopped in a rental van near a military, I think it was a naval base in Washington State, And the initial reports were that they had somehow detected some explosives on the steering wheel. And obviously that's a huge story. Well, I looked into it, and the word I got from federal officials was that it was a false indicator, that there weren't really explosive traces there. Now, I don't know what to make of it. I'm not out there. If I were out there, perhaps I could get a little bit closer to the story, but the initial blush on that was there wasn't anything to it.
Could you go back? You mentioned students selling art. What was the connection again to the...
Well, that somehow these Israeli art students have been spotted around a number of places, including some federal buildings, and that has raised some counterintelligence concerns within the U.S. government that perhaps the Israelis have been conducting some type of intelligence collection activities. I haven't really been able to get all the facts of that story, but I think he was referring to Carl Cameron's story on Fox News, and he's done some good reporting on it.
But one thing I really want to ask you, and I hope you bring it up when Carl Cameron comes on, is that there's a big controversy over a report he did for Fox on 9/11, and where he implicated or he suggested that it was in a four-part series that there were a bunch of Israeli art students that were involved in espionage and may have been following Al-Qaeda, and there was concern that they didn't report this incident to the American authorities, and they were eventually left on visa violations. They were arrested, about 140 of them. Carl Cameron reported this. There was a big brouhaha, and it was on Fox's website, and it was taken off of Fox's website. And it's been a big story in Le Monde. It's been a big story in Le Humanité, and it's been reported in Salon.com. And everywhere you turn and you see the story, the whole thing is always reported about Carl Cameron and his story, and with these oblique quotes about Carl Cameron being puzzled by this strong reaction and everything. So please ask it. I bet you you'll probably have more guests ask Carl Cameron the same thing.
We've had a number of calls on that as well, and he'll be here in about 35 minutes. We'll bring it up with him. Next call, Silver Spring, Maryland, Republican line for Carl Cameron.
Yes. Good morning. I'm calling to congratulate Mr. Cameron on his reporting. He broke one of the most important stories this year with the Israeli spy ring. Problem was that Fox News pulled off the networks almost as soon as he reported it. And I'd just like to ask Mr. Cameron how he felt about that, and how he feels in general when news with potentially damaging, incriminating information against Israel is pulled off almost as soon as it's aired.
Thank you. And we should point out, Carl Cameron, that one of the first calls about an hour and 20 minutes ago dealt with this very issue. First of all, what is the caller talking about, and what happened?
In December of last year, Fox did a four-part series. I reported a four-part series that described several scenarios, several dynamics within the continental United States. There's a report that was circulated, it has now been disclosed by the DEA, that reported that over the course of a year and a half, numerous federal agencies had encountered individuals who refer to themselves as Israeli art students, essentially visiting these facilities, military installations, FBI, DEA, INS, both the publicly listed addresses as well as some that are not made public, and those particular facilities are intended to be kept secret. And they began to ask questions and attempt to sell their art. And we reported that this was a dynamic that had been described by government documents as an intelligence gathering operation. Following that particular story, we then described the U.S. intelligence community's grave concerns that our civilian telecommunications are compromised and vulnerable to intelligence gathering, because many of the companies that provide services in our telephone calling are owned by or closely aligned with Israel, and that they have been occasionally investigated by our federal government for tapping or taking information from our telecommunications for the purposes of intelligence. And finally, that there is a concern in our government that the way in which we actually conduct wiretapping under law enforcement granted judge-approved surveillance subpoenas is also potentially vulnerable to compromise and intercept. Excuse me, again, because some of the companies involved with the manufacturing of that equipment are Israeli, and that they've never been tested for vulnerabilities, and that too has been investigated as a potential threat. Potential and investigation are the important things to remember. There is no claim by anybody in our government that the government of Israel or anybody in Israel is actually spying. That these are mysteries, that there is evidence to suggest a problem, and they've yet to been able to solve it.
Did anyone tell you to kill the story?
No. As a matter of fact, what happened was we did put the transcripts of my story on the internet, and after a period of several days it was taken down off the internet as what I've been told was merely to make available for a huge deluge of war-related material. You got to remember this was December, so we were still very much in the throes of the September 11th aftermath, and there was war underway in Afghanistan, and they had to make way for other news, and we've done some follow-up reporting on it, and there has since our story, which was denounced by the pro-Israel lobby in this country as anti-Semitic and biased and inaccurate, much of what we've reported has now been reported all over the world because the documents that I used and was careful to protect, because some of it was considered classified and secret at the time, have now appeared virtually all over the world, corroborating our story and what we reported.
Well, I agree that talks should continue. Creation of a Palestinian state after the violence has stopped is a laudable goal. I certainly hope that the Cheney visit is a productive visit. I think the moderate Arab states have to be working closely with us to find both a way to stop the violence and an end game that makes sense for everyone in the region, which includes the survival and security and respect for the state of Israel, which I think is absolutely essential to an essential goal of U.S. foreign policy and one I strongly support.
And Robert Simpson emails, could you ask Representative Harman about the deportation of Israeli art students spying in the U.S., and should this worry us? Are you familiar with this issue?
Of Israeli arts, I'm certainly familiar with the fact that we have been rounding up people on student visas and considering whether they might have had anything to do with terrorism, and some of those rounded up are Israelis, but I don't know the specific facts. I would not like to comment except to say that I am not in favor of unlimited detention. I voted for the Patriot Act, which passed the Congress, which put limits on detention, and I think there ought to be court review after 7 days or an appropriate period of time about why it is that we're holding people, and roundups are not things that I think this country stands for.
Hey everybody, so just basically getting to the bottom of 9/11, actually think we pretty much figured out how it was done, and it's a collective effort. So anyway, getting right into the information, and there's a lot of it. There's an Austrian art collective called Gelatin. The interesting thing about gelatin is a term used for explosives, especially for dynamite. It was one of the first terms used for dynamite was gelatin. And it's just a coincidence that this group that is on the 91st floor, that's where their headquarters was, who has complete access to the World Trade Centers, the entire complex, World Trade Center 1 through 7. These people have their name gelatin, which is a type of explosive. So that's the first kind of weird thing about this, besides the fact that these people are given free rein and their very strange backgrounds, which I will get into. So, Gelatin, after 9/11, changed their name to Gelatin, a slightly different spelling. If you know about like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, they just rebrand the same people with different names because it'd make it harder to identify who's who. They did the same with Annie Haddad and Nancy Lanza, the same thing. So anyway, the Austrian collective, I'm sorry, I've been sick for a while, so bear with me. The Austrian collective was supposed to open its New York show on September 11th. This is from Leo Koenig, Inc. What a coincidence. They were supposed to open on September 11th, but about 2 weeks later, after some hesitation over whether to proceed, it launched Habitat Tour 2001, with the first of 3 evening lectures cum performances. So, they were supposed to have their art exhibit, they're supposed to have their show on September 11th. I think the show went just according to plan. And why do I think that? Okay, let's go through some pictures here. These are all available on a website. I'll provide the link. Here's a little image. The operation room is hidden and the balcony is part of the plan. In this image we see BB-18. We'll have some clearer shots. Boxes packed to the ceiling. That's a fuse, type of fuse used in explosives. And we have the man wearing a harness so he can go to the exterior of the World Trade Center, presumably to potentially paint on some sort of a explosive on the exterior. That's why I would think they'd want to go out there. There's a few other reasons you'd want to get on the exterior of the building if you were about to blow it up. Here is Gelatin.net, and watch all these videos. The first video here, Die Schlutze, it's full of fecalphilia. That's when people eat poop, and there's a whole bunch of gay stuff going on in it. Blowjobs with people throwing up. They're giving a blowjob throwing up at the same time, and like I said, a whole bunch of fecalphilia, men eating poop in this video. And so this is the kind of mind that created 9/11. This is the kind of people with the psychological profile.
Non si sa. No, dopo la bici. Dopo la bici. Dopo la bici.
Are you fine?
Okay. No, it's okay.
And like I said, the psychological profiles that they're doing on people, they're mainly to identify total psychos that can be promoted to do things. And when you watch Die Schlutze, don't say I didn't warn you. It's about the most sick video I think I've ever seen in my entire life. So watch with caution. It's fecalphilia, gay stuff going on, and they're passing it off as art. And who's funding these guys? That's what I want to know, because they don't have any good real artwork, and it's all just very expensive stuff they're doing. Okay, here's the B thing I alluded to in the last video. World Trade Center, New York. This is 2000, right before, I believe it was late 2000. And then the surgical intervention in the World Trade Center in New York City. Everything top secret and illegal, of course, in days of conspiratorial work, somewhere on the 148th floor, and using building sites, refused. They had tediously smuggled into the building under their pullovers. They constructed a functioning load-bearing balcony. Blah, blah. They're just, okay, down here it's kind of interesting. Diction used. They kept very mum about it all, because if word had crept out about their coup, they could have been fined heavily for sabotaging a national treasure. So they like sticking little prods in there, because these people are total sickos. Here we see a drawing with a this building is featured across the street. I'll have to look into it. It's probably some sort of hotel. They say their sun rises at 6:59, so that's not on 9/11 because the sun rises later 7:20 something on 9/11. But maybe they're just throwing people off with the pink writing. But what we see here is a detailed schematic with the beams of the World Trade Center and the support columns clearly shown with the elevator shafts and other and specific times. And then here we see a cavernous. This is what they were pictured in a few of the pictures that we're gonna go over here. And this cavernous thing, in my opinion, could have been a way to project out a fireball that looks like an engine or something such as that. If you look into their videos, you'll see that they're kind of obsessed with roller coaster tracks, putting things on tracks and pushing them. So it would have kind of have a similarity there where they could use tracks to launch a projectile in just the manner that they wanted out the backside to make it look like a plane impact. Here we see a piece of their artwork, which is a sex toy in the middle of a palatial, some sort of palatial mansion. They have this funny thing called the International Airport Montello, which is supposedly a big art exhibit in the middle of Nevada. Well, actually, it's northeastern Nevada, in a town called Montello. And there is no airport, but they act like there is. There's no airplanes, but they act like there is. And they got a whole bunch of really strange people driving around out there. One guy looks just like George Bush to me, and he's a very strange dude, and none of these people appear to have jobs. They just kind of dick around all the time. The whole theme for the International Airport Montello is there's a terminal and there's people, but there's no airplanes.
Well, my gosh. Okay, this is different. Let me, does that mean here? This is. Let me just say it's not quite the way I expected it, but oh my! Listen, I don't want you to get away. Whoa, huh? Listen, you're at the International Airport Montello. Okay, let me give you coordinates. So you're surely welcome. you're surely welcome to land if that's appropriate to say that. I mean, you're surely welcome to land. I'm the manager here at Wand at the airport. It's a coffee shop.
It kind of exists to me in some sense like it's almost like a rumor of sorts. You know, when the Apollo 11 moon landing happened, there were all these people that felt that this isn't real. This is a staged event. This is a really easy thing to fake.
And then she repeated it again in English. She said, "Black coffee, please. Just coffee." Hey, this plane came in from New York City, okay?
Although not dangerous, it occasionally can lead to serious complications. Now this could be, let me ask you, have you been under any stress lately? Have you ever heard a doctor say it's all in your head?
Yeah.
Have you ever had hypnotherapy?
No.
Have you ever been hypnotized?
No, I have not.
In your mind now, start counting backwards from 300. 300. 299. 298. 297. That's right, and it doesn't matter if you get lost or to leave a bit out or forget. Just start again about the same place, and notice that you don't notice when you lose your place and drift off, only when you return momentarily before becoming more absorbed. So as long as that part of your mind is active, it's fine that it counts. And when it doesn't count, that's fine too. As you go into trance, you will hear my voice in many different ways.
He's running up the tower again.
he needs to possess Judy, because only Judy, acting as Madeline, who is now also possessed with the ghost of Carlotta Valdez, can verify his true identity. As a result, Scotty follows Madeline into madness, and Judy follows Scotty. They all end up suffering from the same hallucinations and fears, because they all see themselves in each other.
Funny. People, insiders that know how 9/11 was done would be making jokes about having no airplanes at this airport. And here's one part of the page. There is a strong connection between New York City and International Airport Montello. It might be interpersonal by coincidence because of the amount of stones, or because everyone loves nothing and nothing needs something. It's all speculations right now, but evidence keeps building up, and at some point a report will be due. If you are interested or available, please post your thoughts on the New York City International Airport Montello connection below. Here's an interesting project by the E-Team. E-Team is they work concurrently with Gelatin. There's different groups, of course, involved in 9/11. Gelatin is the artist collective from Austria, consisting of 4 people. E-Team consists of 3 people, 2 males and a female. Anyway, and this here, the Ringing Tower was a proposal for a soon-to-be demolished high-rise building in Liverpool, UK. Soon-to-be demolished tower. Former residents of the tower could call the building. Since no one is living there anymore, the answering machine would pick up. Phone ring and the call would be synchronized with the flashing of lights in the entire building. Whatever they said would be broadcast via loudspeaker on the roof. It's my opinion that audio was pumped into the cavernous streets below of New York of jet sounds, and the most likely place to have that would be on the roof. You'd have, or audio at least elevated, and then they're talking about lights synchronizing with somebody calling. It just seems a little too suspicious not to be mentioned here. In this drawing, they again show the speakers on the top of the roofs blaring out sound. Again, if you were going to confuse people into thinking they heard an airplane fly over them, you would probably have big loudspeakers on the roof of a building. Here's another thing on the International Airport Montello, just showing their funding. It's quite well funded, 2008. Here is the paradox of the 10-acre square. This is Gelatin. Notice that they are near a military base, and they have target ranges. There's it's interesting if you look into the actual thing. There appears to be some military connections. Here we see inside the World Trade Center, this is the members of Gelatin with their harnesses on, and right next to boxes jam-packed with what appear to be fuse elements, or just probably explosives. BB-18 again has been identified as a fuse type. So, this appears to be how they did it. They just packed a whole bunch of explosives in, just like we all thought they did. Here we see also the ceiling panels have been completely removed, exposing the under infrastructure of the building. I don't think that's is there any reason to remove the ceiling panels here, really? Unless there's something else going on. And if we watch the video Quick Click, which I showed in the last video briefly, you'll also see the ceiling panels have all been removed. And all these people apparently have some idea, in my opinion, of what's about to happen. Thing from Gelatin's website. They got an airplane flying through a vector, and we have a pyramid with a eyeball symbol on the top. Just pointing this out here. It says high noon in Nevada, prime time in New York, the terror of space. you know, it's just, it all adds up here. Here's the Gelatin book. They had the gall to publish a book. You can buy the book online for $599. So only the elite can revel in this and how they threw it all in our faces. And here, in one of the shots, they have the World Trade Center and what appears to be somebody falling. So anyway, they're a Vienna-based group. This is an article. This is from Quick Click. Here they show World Trade Center, very amazing building outside, very depressing building inside. We want to break through from inside. Amazement. And they show the building turning into a tornado. If you, one of the members of Gelatin, hold on, his name is something Urban. His last name's Urban. So Urban Moving Systems, I think most everybody is familiar with this. Urban Moving Systems International or Incorporated. Anyway, Urban. So it's the last name of one of the members of Gelatin. And they're an artist collective, so they'd probably have the ability to paint this truck. In this image, they're painting pictures using their butts, and a lot of people are watching, and this is considered art. This is what the elite in many cities sit around doing. 127 illuminated windows. Here is 127 illuminated windows on the north face of the World Trade Center by the E-Team. This is demonstrating two things. One is that they're competent enough to know the actual places inside the building, which will be light and dark, aka explosives and no explosives. And also it shows that they were able to cooperate the people who were in these offices, and that the people in these offices were friendlies. Otherwise, I don't think any New York Wall Street kind of a business, or they're not Wall Street, but any New York business is going to say, oh yeah, we'll turn the lights on for you and we'll turn the lights off for you. It's not like we're actually running a business here, you know? Very strange. I think it's demonstrating two things. Again, their technical capabilities, and just that people cooperated. Their people are cooperating in these areas. Here's just a weird diagram. They show a satellite, fluffy clouds, the World Trade Center, shame. Again, here's this building that they said they were going to have breakfast at the top floor, and it's just interesting. Here they have a kind of a beam of sorts, or a focus, on the 91st floor, and they show, again, the top of this building. So, and it says hotel on it. It'd be interesting to look more into this building if it had some sort of a support role, and it appears it did. So here we see just kind of the weird sickness. It says ficken. That means fucking German. This is the platform they're building. They show the beams again, the World Trade Center. Here's something that they sell on their website. It's looks like a 757 or 767 model Boeing is what it looks like to me. This newspaper is in a museum. This is the New York Times Metro section that basically they said exactly what was going to happen. The article is, let's see here, one second. The New York Times Metro section. Where did it go? Here it is. Okay, August 18th, 2001. Let me just try to figure out how to rotate this. One second. Or rotate. There we go. Okay. And there's interesting stuff in this article because they're telling, the New York Times kind of appears to have known what was going to happen. The balcony seen or unseen atop the world. Again, the stunt that they did was have this balcony that they put out supposedly, and that was the only purpose, was just to stand on the balcony. The affair of the balcony ended, if indeed it ever began, with the appearance in July of a slender book of curious title, obtainable in very few places, one of them being an art gallery in a frosted storefront on Broadway near Franklin Street. This is the book I was talking about that's $599. Called The Bee Thing and produced by 4 Vienna-based artists known collectively as Gelatin, the book is demure to the point of being oblique. What little explanation it contains appears to have been scribbled at ballpoint. Among the photos and schematic drawings there are doodles of tarantulas with human heads. In short, the book belies the extravagance of feat it seems to document, the covert installation and brief use of a balcony on the 91st floor of the World Trade Center, 1,100 feet above the earth. 11. 8 photographs, some grainy, all taken from a great distance, depict one tower's vast eastern facade. Okay, anyway. How's this for a line right here? This is pretty funny. Or not funny. The contemporary art world, of course, is rife with acts of subversion, followed by boasting, which is known as documentation. In that context, the beauty of the balcony was that it so literally pushed the envelope. Yet since the Sunday morning on March 2000, when the balcony was allegedly installed, and 19 minutes later, 1991, dismantled, the affair has taken on the outlines of an urban myth, mutated by rumors and denials among the downtown cognoscenti. Again, the contemporary art world, of course, is rife with acts of subversion, followed by boasting, which is known as documentation. Acts of subversion followed by boasting. That's exactly what we're seeing, isn't it? It's so in your face. But they get off on this, and here's a good comment by somebody who points out exactly how they get off on this.
I've given this a lot of thought, right? How bizarre to have those in the pictures of those art students. But then I thought about it, and it's like, you know what? These people love to flaunt it. They love to flaunt their crimes. They love to make fun of us. They love to tell us what they're going to do before they do it. And I think that's what's going on here. I'm not sure that any of those fuse holders or power safe adapters were used in the demolition of those towers. I think it's just as likely that those were props to just flaunt it in our face, just like the Israelis that were arrested in the truck. And on the side of the truck, Rebecca, was the picture of a plane that was about to crash into the Twin Towers. I mean, why would you do that unless you want to flaunt it? And they really get off on flaunting it, which again speaks to their psychopathy. They're absolute psychopaths, cold-hearted killers. And only cold-hearted killers could draw the sketches that we just reviewed in this interview.
And apparently these art students were a part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program. Now, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program was on floors 90 and 91 in World Trade Center Tower 1. But this Israeli art student, I think some people got a little misconception about what I was reporting. It was an innocent art stunt, yada, yada, yada. But as I dug a little bit deeper, one of the art students who was a part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program, there was 15 involved in the Bee Thing stunt for Gelatin, which is the name of that prank that I showed the photos of, the art prank that they removed a window and wheeled a deck out. One of those art students, his name is Hanan Surfati. Now, that gentleman was in the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program. I don't know if he was there that day, but he was a part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program. If you go back to the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program, the list of a lot of those guys is not there anymore. The DEA original arresting report shows this information. Why the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program doesn't show this anymore is the mystery to me, but the DEA report shows it, that he was a member of that program. Well, that's interesting because he's an Israeli military intelligence officer who rented 2 Hollywood apartments close to the mail drop and apartment of Mohammed Atta while he was in Los Angeles at the very same time.
Now, wait a minute. This is the guy Hanan Sarfati, who's part of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Arts Program that allowed these guys to set up and do their stunt in the tower.
Right. Correct. Okay. And this man, Hanan Sarfati, was carrying bank slips showing more than $100,000 deposited from December 2000 to the first quarter of 2001. Other bank slips showed withdrawals for about $80,000 during the same period. Sarfati's apartment, serving as cash pad, was also for at least 2 other art students who were located, I'm not going to give out the addresses, but I have those addresses, where allegedly lead hijacker Muhammad Atta's mail drop was. And they were also, both Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, were renting an apartment 2 blocks away from Hanan Sarfati when he was in Florida at the very same time.
What a coincidence. They just keep bumping into each other.
Right. And so DEA agents, and the reason why they found all this out, by the way, was because they were tracing these guys a part of an Israeli art student spy program. There was about 140 to 200 Israeli art students that were penetrating military bases. If you watch my film Core Corruption, I show the report. These guys penetrated DEA, IRS, Pentagon, military bases, you name it, and the ATF. And they did it because they claimed to be art brokers and art students. They would walk around with art portfolios and say, hey, I've got to deliver this. It's a very expensive art. Yeah. Somehow they made it past security, and they were walking around the halls of the Pentagon. And they ended up penetrating the entire United States security. And the DEA report found all this out because they were tracking an ecstasy trafficking ring. They were tracking drug runners. And drug runners were staying ahead of them by their phone calls, switching, and their stuff like that. And when they came across the fact that these guys were ex-Israeli military and they were spying, and they were certain of this, the investigation was put into a top-secret compartmentalized report, and the DEA raided an Irvington apartment in Texas, and Hanan Sarfati was down there in Texas as a part of this Israeli spy ring. Is a huge connection, because this specific spy ring was following the cells in 9/11. This specific spy ring was on 9/11 with vans packed with explosives. This specific spy ring was caught trying to blow up a nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania. They were caught surveying the Sears Tower. And there was speculation by Chicago PD they were trying to blow up the Sears Tower. That report got buried. If people search hard enough, they'll find these reports. This is a very weird connection to have.
It certainly is.